All right, everybody. Hello and welcome, welcome, welcome. I know it has been a long time since I've been going live, so I'm a little bit rusty. Cut me some slack. I just had a baby, guys. It's been crazy. But that's what we're here to discuss today. I have my beautiful friend Alicia here. She is a fabulous writer for Evie magazine. You often can catch her live streams with Ramsey Paul on Happy Homeland, and I'm sure she'll be back in just a second. I think she had to step away, but I will use this time to say thank you for joining us. Thank you for sticking around for as long as you have been. I know I've been offering my commentary on the sideline, but it's been busy, guys. It's been a crazy year, as you can imagine. Families getting bigger, going through pregnancy with toddlers. It's insane. I'm happy to introduce my beautiful friend, Alicia. Thank you for joining today on Online Personalitea. I am very happy to have you. Why don't you give everybody a little bit of an introduction, tell us about you, and then we'll jump right into today's topics.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. First of all, I'm so glad that we get to chat again. And for anybody that doesn't know, Kim and I do D&D on Tuesdays also. And as you mentioned, I'm with Ramsey Paul on Wednesdays. And so I'm a mom of 4. And I've been having babies since I was 26. So in total, I've been pregnant or breastfeeding for 6 solid years now. And I'm a pro mother. What can I say? I mean,
and they were all unmedicated births too, weren't they?
All unmedicated, yeah. And my first was actually in Japan, so exotic, right? No, not so much, but it was an experience, and yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say really about myself. Not much.
Well, I thought today would be a really good. I know me and you talk about this offline actually quite a bit now that I think about it, just like sharing like positive birth stories and positive pregnancy experiences, and like even like sharing the positive sides through difficult pregnancy experiences, because you sound like you have like very, very like stressful, difficult pregnancies, but you still, elect to do it over and over again, we'll dissect a little bit of like what the magic sauce is behind all of that. But I wanted to start with our most recent birth stories, and I wanted to give you the floor to share with us first.
All right, so let me see. Let me mute this super fast. Sorry, y'all don't need to listen to me clearing my throat. I am just getting over a cold that my children gave me. So, so let's start. So Michael is my youngest, and he was my first home birth. So all of my births, they have been unmedicated, but they've always been at a birth center. So in Japan, they were at a birth center, and then my other 2 births were at a birth center. And this was the first one that we chose to do at home. And what pushed me is that we actually moved states. So I would have given birth at the same birth center that we had been using, that I absolutely loved, in Texas, but then we moved to a different state, and the laws are different here, and how they do things is really strange, and I just didn't want to mess with it. So it kind of forced my hand in a way that I didn't like, but it was ultimately one of the most empowering, wonderful things that ever happened. And one of the other things I did to kind of game the system is like, this is my 4th birth, and I honestly just don't want to be bothered anymore. So I didn't find a midwife until like I delayed it as long as possible because I didn't want the test. I didn't want any of that. I wanted like the ultrasound to let you know, like, yeah, your baby isn't deformed. It's going to be okay to have a home birth. Like, it's not going to need medical intervention. And that's really all I wanted. And so I just delayed everything almost until 20 weeks, essentially. But so let's see, let's start at, I guess, kind of when I went in to labor. I called my mom up when I was around close to 38 weeks, I guess, because I had a feeling my births, usually I give birth like slightly before 40 weeks. And so she came up and stayed with us. And then I went into labor. You're obviously like super tired, super over it. And that's how I was feeling. And then you just like finally go into labor and you're like, oh yes, like, I don't have to suffer anymore. And that's the thing, is everybody thinks that like, oh, birth is so like traumatic, it's awful, and they picture like Hollywood, how Hollywood portrays it, like the woman just like screaming and losing her shit or whatever. And that's not how birth has to be. That's not really how it is. But anyway, so you're just so relieved that you finally get to give birth. And so my mom took the other three to the hospital, not to the hospital, to a hotel, sorry. And then from there, we called our midwife, and she came up, a little bit later, checked me, everything was going fine. It was going to be a while. And so she just pieced out to lunch. Sorry about that. And then me and my husband just got to labor in our own home comfortably, do whatever we want, eat whatever I wanted, drink whatever I wanted. When I'm in labor, I really don't feel like eating and drinking. And that's why my husband is such a godsend in those situations, because he makes sure that I'm eating and drinking. And he also knows like how to get me to eat and drink, like what I want to eat and drink. And so he's over there, like, just the Alicia whisperer, like would feed the
good husbands are a godsend. Like really, a good husband makes every bad situation or every stressful situation so much better.
They are the ultimate labor partner, and I feel so bad for husbands and wives who haven't gotten to experience that, because there's nobody else that's like more in tune with you, and there's nobody else that knows you better than your husband. And so who else like better to help you in your like most vulnerable state that you'll ever be in? And it's such a blessing every time he's gotten to help transition our kids earthside, and it's something that he values immensely as well. And so the difference between this labor and all my other ones is that my other ones progress like at a pretty steady state, except this labor would start and stop, and I would have to keep like moving. I had to stay on my feet almost for the entire thing. And that was grueling, because it lasted, let's see, my contractions started in the afternoon. It was like a 12-hour labor, which is really long for like a fourth labor. My previous two labors were like around 6 hours. This one was 12. And I had to be on my feet the whole time, because every time I sat down or relaxed, it would stop. But I knew that it was labor because the contractions were strong enough and things were moving how they usually do. I had like all of the signs and symptoms that we don't have to get into now. And so I had to stay on my feet, and it was awful. And the midwife came and checked, and like I knew I was progressing, but the midwife did not trust me when I said, and I had told her this beforehand, I said, look, I'm going to be in labor, and you are not going to think that I am labor. Because with my previous birth, I told her I was laughing, I was cracking jokes in between contractions. Like 2 minutes before pushing, I was literally like telling stories and cracking jokes. I'd have a contraction, I'd breathe through it, and then I would go back to making jokes. And then, it was time to push, and my baby was there. And so I told her, like, you won't think I'm in labor. This is how it's gone. This is how it went the last time. This is how it's gone every single other time. Like, just trust me, okay? Like, I know what I'm doing. And so, I don't know. She's probably thinking in her mind, like, well, I've seen, like, over 100 births. And so, I know what's going on. But the fact of the matter is, like, you don't know your body. Nobody else knows your body better than you do. And so anyway, I was like, labor was going on. And she kept saying like, oh, you're not progressing. It hasn't really like, yeah, she just kept measuring like 5 centimeters. And I was like, I know that I'm more than 5 centimeters. I can feel it in my body that it's more than that. And But whatever, she was saying that. And so we get to maybe 9 p.m. Or no, it's later than that. It's later than that. Anyway, it's nighttime, time to go to bed. We had like napped on the couch and I could feel my labor progressing. Finally, when I was like laying down and like trying to go to sleep, that's when my body decided like, okay, I don't need the extra help from you. I'm just going to labor. And so my husband, I think it was maybe the oxytocin, because my husband sat on the couch. I sat like laid back in his lap and we both tried to go to sleep. And I really dozed on and off. He went to sleep, but just being held by him, feeling secure and safe, like no matter what happens, you know, things are going to be okay. And then my body found that natural rhythm without me having to stand up and walk around and or sit with my legs really wide, and things were progressing. And I knew they were, because they were getting to that painful point, but I still wasn't making any noise because there's no point to it. There's really no point in freaking out. That's my approach. Just like, oh, don't waste your energy crying. Like just sit there and just breathe. And it's your only job is just to sit and breathe. And so she comes back in. She sees that literally all I'm doing is breathing. And she's like, oh, I think maybe it's time to go to bed. Like, we'll stay here, you know, in case something happens, but you should try to go to bed. And like, I asked her before that if we could set up the pool, because I've given birth the other 2 times in the pool. And that was like the most wonderful thing ever. I love being in the water. It helps so much. And they're like, oh no, like usually we only let people get in the pool at like 7 centimeters because, you know, if you get in the pool, it can like slow things down. And we don't want that to happen. And so I was like, in my head, I'm like, things are not going to slow down. Like, I just want to get in the pool. But she also says that like, I'm not 7 centimeters and I don't want to slow the labor down. And so unfortunately, I was just like so tired. I was so worn out. And I was just like, you know, I trusted her expertise over my own body. And that's like my one regret of the whole thing. So my husband and I go upstairs. We try to go to sleep. And of course, I can't go to sleep. I am in so much pain. Like, laying down, to me, in my experience, is the worst thing you can do when trying to give birth, because all you have to think about at that like is like just your misery. It's just like you're in bed and miserable, and that's all you can think about. And so I went through like 3 horrible contractions, just laying there, just like trying to be quiet, but like squirming around because so much pain. And like, I was honestly like, I was getting more upset with my husband too. I'm like, why isn't he waking up? Like, he's sleeping through all of this. Like, and I'm just over here suffering. And I'm like, and then I started to get pissed off. I was like, they wouldn't let me have my water. I'm just gonna go get the water by myself. Like, this sucks. So I went, and it was in this rental house. And so we had this super tiny shower. It was like literally like a stall shower, just a square, or it's like kind of a rectangle, I guess, but it was very small. And I'm like, I'm gonna go get water by myself because this sucks. And I go in my shower, and then I start to feel it. It's like there's this point that I think everybody, when they're laboring, feels, and it's like the most intense pressure, or for some people it's pressure, some people feel it's pain that you've ever experienced. And when it hits you, the second or third contraction like that, you're like, I don't know how much longer I can endure this. And whenever you hit that point, you also simultaneously know, if you've done this before, that it's almost over. Like, you just have to put up with it for just a little bit more, and then it's going to be over. And I also know from my previous birth that that's at the point where my body has allowed me to like do very gentle pushes for whatever my reason. My body just needs that. Some people can like breathe out their babies. My body, I hit that point, I could start doing gentle pushes, and that makes it so much better. And so I start doing that with the contractions. I realize, okay, my baby's coming. Nobody's in this shower with me. Like, everybody's asleep or downstairs. And so I call myself, bed, Ben, and he finally comes, and I'm like, go get the midwives. And I was like, I think the baby's coming. And so he's like, okay. And he's like half asleep. And he goes downstairs. I hear them just leisurely chatting downstairs and like laughing. And then my husband comes upstairs and then it's just quiet. And I'm just in there in the shower by myself, like groaning with like each contraction. And then I can feel my baby's head get like lower and lower and lower. And then my husband comes back. Like it's been like several, like I don't know how long, it's been like several minutes, several contractions. I can feel my baby coming. I'm making noise. Like I'm not going to yell out. Like there's really nothing else I can do. I'm not getting out of that shower. And my husband comes in, he's like, you okay? I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? That was the first time I have ever cussed at my husband. Oh no, I said, where the fuck have you been? What the fuck have you been doing? I don't remember what I said, but it was one of those phrases. And I was like, and then I hear downstairs like clattering. It's like they're coming. My midwife is shouting, oh, she's upstairs. They have this like big giant bag of things. She's like, I'm coming. And she's like hauling her butt up the stairs. And my husband's just standing there because the shower is tiny and he can't come in there. And so while they were coming up the stairs and while my husband went to go get them, I had birthed my son's head like by myself. And I knew it was like that was the push that was going to birth his head. And I was like, I can either like by myself, like this is my choice. A, I can push him out by myself right here, right now, or I can continue to do the gentle pushes and prolong my suffering. And I was like, no, hard no. Like I'm doing this. Like this baby's coming out. And so I pushed his head out, and my midwife like slides in there like baseball, you know, where they're like getting in there for home plate. She slides kind of in the shower, and she's like looking up at me, making sure everything's okay. And I had, like I say, I was standing on two legs when I like birthed his head, and I was like holding, I was so concerned that his body was just going to slip out because almost all my other babies, they've essentially come out like all in one go. There hasn't been really any much of a pause between like their head and the rest of their body. And so I was so concerned that was going to happen. It's like, I'm like, my hands are in his head, and then I'm able to like kneel down on one knee. And so she's checking everything out, but my contractions had like stopped. And so, and like the clamor of everything, all of a sudden it was just like very quiet, and we were just chilling. We're just waiting, like what's going to happen. You know, your body's going to, your body's eventually going to push out the rest of the baby. But my body's never done that before. So I'm just like, okay, like, I've seen this on Instagram, other women take some time to push out that second half of the baby. And so I'm just waiting. And then she's like, I'm going to go ahead and pull him out. And so she just pulls him out, and like, it's really easy after that. Cause like the head is the biggest part. And so she pulls him out, and she unwraps the cord, and she's like, yeah, and she hands him to me, and he's crying almost immediately, and it's really good. And he's, all purpley or whatever, and a giant head of hair. This is my first hairy baby. And the reason why she pulled him out is because that cord like was wrapped. It wasn't like wrapped once, it was like several times. And she thinks that's why the labor was like starting and stopping and taking so long, is because he was just like wrapped up inside me, and he just needed that extra gravity that my body was giving him like while I was standing up. And that's why things wouldn't progress past a certain point. And I'm really glad that she was there, honestly, because when we were looking at him, his like face was all bruised. He was my first like bruised up baby too. His face was all bruised up, and then the sclera, so the white part of your eye, some of that was like a little bit bloodshot and had like just a little bit of the just those blood patches in it. And it's because like he was getting like, you know, things are a little bit too tight in there, but you know, she solved that problem and just helped him on his way out, and everything is fine, and he's adorable and super smart and interactive and everything that he's the best little baby, honestly. But yeah, that's my birth story.
I love that. Okay, before I jump into mine, I do have 2 questions. One, what were the laws in Texas that you referred to or the laws where you moved? I don't remember if it was from Texas to somewhere else, but
yeah. So the state that I moved to, for some reason, doesn't allow birth centers, and it's insane. So statistics show that it is safer to give birth at a birth center as opposed to like a home birth. In terms of like mortality rate, like that's the only statistic I'm referring to here in terms of safety, infant mortality rate. Except for some reason, Arkansas has just gone like completely like, no, there's no such thing as statistics, and has outlawed birth centers. And they last year apparently, or the year before that, they were going to allow birth centers, and then that legislation got hung up. And I don't remember why they didn't follow through with it, but they were going to allow birth centers. Midwives had stuff set up for it. And then they were just like, no, we're not going to do this anymore. And so you can have a midwife assisted birth in a hospital. And that was one of the options that I pursued before going with my home birth. And I just didn't like it. So I had to go to the hospital because like I thought like my cervix was opening. And so I went in to like get checked out. And just the way that like the nurses were talking about, because like you have to just like sit and triage for freaking ever. And so just like the way that the nurses were talking about some of the patients, and they weren't talking about them like they were humans. It was more like they were products. And the fact that like there's one mom that apparently kept coming back because she thought that she was in labor, and the nurses were kind of like laughing. I was like, oh, like, yeah. And she had been back again, and they hadn't checked her out yet. And they're like, oh, yeah, I don't think she's actually in labor. I think she really wants to be in labor. And I can, again, you see this like 1,000 times a year. I understand the routine of it all, but I also feel like there should have been like some sympathy. Like, I don't know, like maybe like,
like
oh,
also,
yeah, like,
you have to consider that there are other patients sitting around that can hear you, and like if you're talking about this other random person, like what are you gonna say like as soon as I leave the freaking room? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It just it's an air of like discomfort and a lack of trust between the physician and the patient, regardless of what patient they're talking about at the time.
Yeah.
That I mean, like I'm so turned off by hospital anything at this point. I with my first 2 pregnancies, I did have them both at the hospital. The first time was because so in the state of Connecticut, which is where I gave birth the first time, there's only one birthing center, and that birthing center is in Danbury, Connecticut. Have you heard of the show Orange is the New Black?
Yeah.
Okay, have you watched the show? Are you familiar with
watched like in college I watched some of it. Like I don't remember how many seasons I got through.
Are you familiar in season 1 there's this pregnant woman and she has to get taken to the hospital to deliver her baby, and then she comes back to prison, and they talk about it. She comes back and she looks like she's just the life's been sucked out of her and everything.
Yes, I remember that.
Danbury Hospital. Just as a little preface. So Danbury Hospital is connected to this birthing center, and honestly, there were a lot of red flags. But I was like, okay, I'd rather ignore the red flags of this birthing center because it was during COVID, and the COVID protocols for the hospital versus the were astronomically difference.
Yeah.
I wanted my husband there. I wanted my doula there. I wanted so many things. Regardless, they messed up. They were horrible. They were like the worst ever. They were like very much like those nurses. And by the time I was like 9 centimeters, I hadn't slept in 4 days, and I felt I physically couldn't do it. So I remember like tearfully looking up at my husband and just saying like, "Are you going to be disappointed in me if I get my epidural so I can have some sleep?" And he just like bear hugged me and was like, "No, it's okay." And as soon as I said I wanted to go to the hospital, I did hear one of the nurses say, "Oh, thank God," and she clocked out and went home. So like just mind like if you like don't like my first like if I'm gonna like depart lessons to women in this whole thing, if you notice red flags in your caregivers, regardless if it's birth or anything else, pay attention to those red flags and find a new caregiver, because the period of like instability between having that is gonna be worth it when you find that next person.
No, that's the thing is like our bodies aren't designed to give birth when we feel unsafe.
Yeah.
It's a mammal reflex that like literally like humans aren't this extreme, but like gazelles, if they sense danger while they're giving birth, their body will suck the baby back up so they can run away. Like that, and that's how humans are designed to a lesser extent. We're not gazelles, but our bodies are not designed to give birth in a state of fear. Like, oh my gosh, I have like chill bumps of anger for you. I'm so sorry.
And you know, I had a happy, healthy baby, and I know how to advocate myself. So when I had to last minute move to the hospital, they tried to make me stay and say, "Oh, you have to stay 24 hours, or we're going to call social services, we're going to call CPS, whatever." And they tried to cite a policy that didn't exist. And when I asked them to show it to me, they couldn't show it to me. And therefore they had to let me go because they realized that I wasn't going to I'm too smart. I actively knew how to advocate for myself.
You know your rights. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't going to let them gaslight me into billing my insurance an arm and a leg for nothing. Yeah. The second was a hospital as well, but that was also because like we had just moved into this place like literally 3 weeks before I gave birth. So I was like, there's no way this place is going to be ready. And again, with the CPS and the like, oh, you have to stay for 24 hours. And I just like, we could talk about this more at the end. I like to try to help give, especially women who do not feel comfortable doing it at home, because you're right, there is always a risk. You know, if you want to be where like, in a medical environment, that totally makes sense, especially for your first birth, because I'm sure as you can relate, your first birth, you're paranoid about everything. You don't want caffeine. You're like, oh, cheese, I can't eat cheese.
Cheese, cheese, it's gonna kill my baby.
Oh, cheese is gonna murder my baby. You know, so and you learn better. You learn you can have a little bit of decaf coffee. You can chill. But I just like I will go into later like how to approach your physician in order to like maintain your bodily autonomy and like stand up for yourself. But to get into my actual home birth story, I had been wanting to do this home birth since my first kid, and like I've been wanting to like do the unmedicated thing, and I had felt so defeated both other times that I like had medical intervention and I got the epidural. And the big thing for me was like, okay, like I know what an epidural feels like. So like when I'm in labor, like, am I gonna like chicken out? Is it gonna be a thing? But really like the biggest help for me was focusing entirely on getting my body ready for labor. Cause like the like you can help your body along, like you can help the baby be lower, you can help your body get as effaced as possible before you're in active labor, you can help with the dilation. My midwives actually did the balloon thing. I really wish where
the volleyball. It's called a volleyball.
Thank you. Oh, I'm so glad you're here. And they dilated me to 6, like just with that in an hour. And I went to go to sleep around 10 o'clock. My midwife stayed on my couch, and me and my husband were laying in my bed, and he's stroking my back and giving me massages, and like my contractions are starting to pick up and so fast, like get closer together. And like he's got like an app on his iPad that he was just like tracking the time, like looking at me like get up and down, because he was just like, he has this like nervous energy, like he just couldn't sleep. He was watching me.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. I want to say by like 11 o'clock, the contractions were like 3 minutes apart. And he was like, okay, like, let's get you downstairs into the tub. And we came downstairs and I had a, just like a little bathtub looking thing that was already inflated. We filled it up with water. I got in and I labored in there for 4 hours. And I'm going to be really honest. I'm going to, like, what's the point if you're not going to be honest? Especially after like hour 2, was just like so done. And I think I even texted you. I was like, never doing this again. Never doing. I go like, what the hell was I thinking? Like, I just had this moment where like I picture all of like the feminists behind like a glass panel, you know, like in an execution room or like an interrogation room, and like just sitting there watching me going like, why am I so stupid? Why did I do this? And honestly, like my biggest apprehension and the biggest thing during all of that was like, I thought that pushing was going to be the peak of the pain. I thought that was going to be the worst. It was going to hurt so bad. And I was like, if this hurts as bad as it does, and that's going to be worse, I don't know why I agreed to do this. This is the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. I don't know. And then like my midwives were I feel so bad. I'm horrible. I'm the meanest person ever. And like, I didn't think of telling her, like, don't tell me it's going to almost be over if you don't know, like, the baby's about to drop out right now. Because like, she was literally like rubbing my back for like an hour straight. Like, it's going to happen. This means it's coming any minute now. It means it's coming any minute now. I just remember at one point, my husband insists I called her a C word. He insists. I don't think I did. I don't think I did. But according to him, I said, you're being a C word. Don't tell me it's about to happen unless it's about to happen.
Oh no!
I have no memory whatsoever. According to him, it happened. I'm sort of inclined to believe it.
I blacked out.
I literally like.
I cannot be held responsible for the things I said during birth.
Ironically enough, the person that assisted in my delivery was deaf.
Well, I mean, the small things.
So it's like at least one person in the room didn't hear me say C next to.
Didn't hear me lose my mind.
Like actually lose my mind. And like honestly, like, and especially like I want to say like the 45 minutes before I actually pushed was the worst part for me because like I said, it was like I was freaking myself out. And that's, they talk about this in all sorts of like pain-free method birthing classes. Like the fear will make it worse. The fear and the stress will always make it worse. And I just remember like looking at my husband and being like, you have to get me to the hospital right now. And everybody at that point, of course, was like, Kim, like, even if you go to the hospital, they're not going to be able to give you IV fluids and get you an epidural. You're going to have, you want to give me.
We are past the point of no return, sweet baby.
No, sweetie, you're going to be fine. I was like, in this moment, I hate everybody in the room. And I want to murder you all. And I just remember the midwife was like, okay, like you're like almost entirely effaced, but we need just a little bit more and she can come out and you have to stand up. And I was just like, no. I was such a little gremlin, especially towards the last little bit. I was like so bad. Finally, like my husband and everyone like lovingly and very patiently after the 4 hours like coaxed me out of the pool, and I'm standing and I go to like sit on the little, we had like a portable toilet downstairs because rooms upstairs, so we had one set up down here, and as soon as I sat down, apparently everyone in the room audibly heard the last of it go. And I literally like I like sat on the edge of my couch and with my husband looking right in my eyes, I just like 2 contractions, 2 pushes, baby was out, everything was wonderful. And honestly, the pushing didn't hurt at all. Like you were saying before, like the pressure, it was pressure. It was definitely pressure. Like you really understand after like I did it with an epidural, so like I didn't feel anything in this. But with this one, you really understand like, oh, that's why you dilate the like, so, like when the baby's head goes through, you're not like squeezing a bowling ball through a pinhole. Your body freely, your body pushes it out, and it's ready to accept this, human. And it's the second craziest part is this was my biggest baby of them all. All of my babies were 6 pounds. And its baby was literally an ounce under 8 pounds. And it was like, what the heck was I so scared of? Like, I'm just sitting there and I'm feeling kind of embarrassed. And I'm like bad. And I'm like apologizing to everybody, being so mean. But like at the end of the day, like the summary of my story, if you can find a midwife that you really trust, if you can find, like, these women have been catching babies for like 30 years, and like while we have like personality differences that like we're kind of like like they knew what they were doing, and I trusted that they knew what they were doing. And being able to like have my appointments at home, that's amazing. And like just like she was literally like just so comfortable, just like doing exactly what I wanted, like being comfortable, like having How I Met Your Mother on while I'm like literally delivering. Like, I remember at one point she was like, "Is this what she wants on?" And my husband's like, "This is her talk radio." I'm like, "You're like, all right, Barney Stinson in the room, that's fine." But like really, there's, as long as you're like I'm not like a, super healthy human being. I have a little extra weight on me. I don't like necessarily exercise as much as I should. I do eat actually really well, which I think contributed to this. But if you're like a healthy person and you can find a team that you're confident in, it's really not a huge risk to have a home birth. And especially like for me, I happen to be lucky. I live in a college town near a hospital. Like the nearest hospital to me is like 15 minutes away.
Yeah.
So like in the worst case scenario, I could be in an ambulance on the way to the hospital, and like the midwives there would know when to make that call. You know what I mean? And I just think that there's such a lack of empowerment around birthing, and like I feel like that's weird to say because like there is such a like hippy dippy like birthing, like loud birthing community that's all about like raw sisterhood and all this other stuff, but like it's not actually all that empowering. It does, like, it feels like there's a lot that's lacking, and maybe that, and let me know what you think about this, but maybe that has to do with like the inherent kind of like animosity between like women who don't know each other necessarily, who disagree on stuff. Like I'm sure you've seen, like, if you share a positive birthing experience about an unmedicated birth, there's always a woman who comes in and is like, "Oh, was that you're saying I'm inadequate?" I feel like that kind of
no, I absolutely like, I hate. There's like that phrase like, you don't get a medal for having an unmedicated birth. Nobody's giving you a medal for breastfeeding your child. And it's like, you're right. Like, I'm not doing this for a medal though. I'm doing this because I believe that it's the healthiest option for my body and the body of my baby. Like,
well, even just saying that they take as like an active aggression or like a microaggression, I guess they would call it, because it says that like by not taking that decision, they're inherently picking the lesser of the options, which makes them a lesser person. And that's not necessarily. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. But that's the most frustrating thing is like you're not allowed to say something is healthier anymore, even if it's the truth. Like, yes, like, I'm sorry, breastfeeding your child is healthier than formula. It is the better option. Like, but you're not allowed to say that anymore because people take it personally. Because I understand, I understand why you would feel convicted at that statement. But at the same time, you're not the arbiter of science. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry. If facts don't care about your feelings, like that whole thing, like,
Yeah.
It's just how it is.
Well, it's not even just like not even being the arbiter of science. Like, not everything is for everyone. Like, I'm, you know, like, not every conversation is meant to include you. And like, there's the like the loudest, I would say, range from the ones who are like legitimately have serious medical issues, or like have had like can't, like, for whatever reason, produce milk, for example, like with breastfeeding, and like, of course, like, you feel serious empathy for these people, and like, of course you wish there were better ways. That objectively doesn't mean that that child wouldn't be healthier if they were breastfed.
Yeah.
You know, that's not an attack on the mom. And like, quite frankly, I you know, I would assume you feel the same way, but I feel immense empathy for somebody who wants to breastfeed and actively really tries hard to breastfeed and just can't.
Yeah.
But for every one of those, there's 5, I feel, that are just like, no, I don't want to.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing that like really gets me is like
that though. Like, if you don't want to, that's fine. You're still denying the healthiest choice to your baby.
Yep.
And like, I'm not going to judge you for it, to each their own, but it doesn't mean that you're not picking the better option.
Yeah. No, and I completely agree. And I think so. This is my thing. I think that people today think that hard equals bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we are very averse to suffering. And so like there's that whole thing of like, well, breastfeeding just wasn't good for my mental health. It's like, that makes me so angry. I remember that was like the big thing back in 2019.
Yeah.
And it just made me so angry because there I was with freaking PTSD, postpartum depression in Japan, being explained to by a Japanese lactation consultant with a translator on the phone about how to nurse my baby in a Japanese hospital. And like it just made me so angry. I was like, there are mothers out there that chose to not sacrifice for their child. And they're like, well, what's best is a happy mother. I'm like, yes, but this is temporary and you can learn how to be happy.
Right.
Like, happiness is a skill. I'm sorry, it is. Like, right. There are things in life that make us happy, like for sure, but it's also a skill. And you can do hard things. Like, it's not, so I'm not going to pat you on the back for taking the easy way out. I'm sorry. I'm not. Like,
yeah.
You're an adult. You are there. You are tasked to protect your child that has been given to you. Like, you are no longer the child. You have to grow up at some point. And that means like, doing hard things.
Also, like, I'm sorry, but like, oh, like, it's good enough isn't really what you should, the standard you should hold yourself to as a mother. No. And I'm not
is that the bar that you want for your child? Like, oh, they're good enough.
Yeah, no, it's you know, it's fine. It's, you know, they'll be mediocre.
They're over there licking windows. Oh, it's good enough. Yes.
We just pack you full of like sugar and all sorts of like disgusting chemicals. You know, it just, and like I said, there are genuinely people, like, you know, people who have to work. Okay, I understand. There are situations where women genuinely do have to go back to work. Yep. Pumping takes a lot of time. Pumping takes a lot of, like, especially if you have to do it in an office environment, you have to be able to make sure your pump is sterile. You have to make sure you have a place to store the milk. You have a place to transfer the milk when you come back home. You have to, you know, I'm not going to pretend that it's, you know,
and just in terms of like physiology, that's not how your body is designed to do it. And unfortunately, a lot of moms dry up. And I feel for legitimate situations, I have all the sympathy in the world for.
And like that's the thing, like there will be people who try and like it is too difficult, and like they acknowledge that while this is the better option, it just isn't going to work out. And it's not because like, oh, I'm uncomfortable or whatever. That is going to happen, and we do have alternatives for that exact purpose. I'm totally okay with this, but this like weird like protective army that is formed around laziness and like the idea of seeking comfort over just like having any sacrifice whatsoever for this little person that you created, you are responsible for. You are the person that is going to determine the trajectory of pretty much the rest of their lives. I mean, they can take ownership of themselves at some point when they're an adult, but like you set the standard for that. And if your standard is good enough, what is that?
Yeah, no, they're the torchbearers of mediocrity, and it's a crab bucket. You know, I learned that phrase like a few months ago. Crab bucket, like you know, whenever the crab tries to escape the crab bucket, like the other crabs will pull it down, and that's exactly what it is.
Right,
and it's really unfortunate.
All right, well, I'm sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it definitely is. I have a couple things for us ready to pull up. Some stuff for us to look at. All right. If you ever needed a reason to have a home birth with a qualified doula, here is one for you. This is a frightening audio in case something happens to the post. Doctors and nurses discussing how they can use DCFS to take infants from their parents, gain custody for an hour. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. Nope, that's why did that happen? Okay, there you go. Where did it go? Sorry,
there
guys. Anyway, there we go. Gain custody for a whole 2 minutes without DCFS ever showing up. Inject the baby with vitamin K against the parent's will, then give it back. If you listen closely, you will hear them finding out, oh, we only have custody for what, 2 minutes? Yeah, long enough to give the shot. Then chuckling. Let's play the audio, shall we?
Has options on the wording on this, you know, and actually I just texted our neonatologist because he wanted to be here and couldn't, but we're a little concerned that hospitals will, but it says DCFS may. It's mandating hospitals to do things, but giving DCFS options to do things. So then that puts the hospital in a little bit of a problem, because I don't think hospitals want to be taking custody over all the time. And then DCFS may investigate for medical neglect.
The issue is whether you're mandated to give the vitamin K by taking protective custody. This is what this does. It doesn't mean that DCFS has to say the parent can't be a parent, but it gives you the chance to give the child vitamin K through DCFS. Correct. So I think it's okay. And you don't need every parent to be accused of medical neglect and investigated. You need the right to give the vitamin K, and which DCFS will provide you the custody for with this consistent message.
And I think you want the wiggle room of the may on the DCFS side, because
yeah, so here, let me move that from the screen. I mean, just like I said, if you really I like the post said too, if you really need a reason to not be at a hospital to give birth, like that should tell you everything you need to know about the motives of these people, that they're willing to, you know, manipulate the letter of the law in order to gain custody of your child long enough to inject them with poison and then, you know, restore custody back to you.
Yeah, it's vile is what it is, and just the arrogance that it requires to believe that you know better than the parent because you went to school. Because that's what it is. You know, I know the studies. I went to school. This is what we're taught by Big Pharma. Because who runs the studies that told you that vitamin K is beneficial for this? So, and this is what ticks me off too. Is like, oh, well, that's anecdotal evidence. That doesn't count. Well, yes, it does, because that's how hypotheses are formed. And then that's how we get science changed. Exactly. Because all 4 of my children have had jaundice. My first and second needed treatment. My third didn't. And my third child, I got the preservative-free vitamin K shot. And then with my fourth child, I didn't do any of the shots. My fourth child, the doctors weren't even worried about. They're like, oh yeah, like he's like a little, you know, jaundiced looking, but like, and so they tested him and they like, yeah, no, like we're not concerned at all. My daughter, they wanted to like monitor just to make sure. But my fourth child, the one that did not receive any injections whatsoever, doctors weren't even worried about. And then they go, oh, it's anecdotal evidence. Well, it's what every single other mom will tell you as well. Like, oh yeah, all my children struggle with jaundice. And then we stopped giving the vitamin K shot and we stopped struggling with jaundice. And if you go and you look and you read the adverse reactions because every single vaccine out there, every single shot, every single medication has an insert. If you go and read the vitamin K insert, it says, yes, adverse reaction, hyperbilirubinemia, which means jaundice.
Yeah, exactly.
And doctors will swear, no, vitamin K doesn't cause jaundice, blah, blah, blah. Well, then why does the insert say that it does?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't think of the exact example off the top of my head right now, but there have been so many different cases where I've seen specifically like, oh, like, what about this side effect? That side effect doesn't exist. Open insert, point to side effects right here. It says the thing that you're saying it doesn't.
Yeah.
And, you know, the thing is, I do genuinely believe that there are doctors, particularly OBGYN, who might not necessarily have ill intent when it comes to vaccinations, but genuinely believe, because that's what they're taught in their education, that this is what is supposed to be appropriate. For example, my biological mother was telling me that when she was going through this process with my older brother, his pediatrician was like, oh, you need to give him, you know, like 6 shots in one go, basically. And she was fighting back on her, and the doctor was, you know, like, oh, well, like, I'm a professional, the same stuff that we were talking about. I know so much better than you. And only years later did she come back, because they were friends, and say to my mom, you know, I'm really sorry about pushing all those vaccines at the same time for your son. I genuinely thought that was what we were supposed to be doing, and only since then have I realized that's too many, and I've seen that it's too many firsthand. So, like I said, I do believe, and maybe at this point that's inexcusable. I don't know to what extent I really believe that, but the fact that vaccines, despite all the contrary evidence, are pushed on people, and you're not given equal weight to the risks, as well as, you know, you're kind of shut out of society. You know, you can't do most daycares if you're not vaccinated. A lot of schools require vaccinations, and in not every state do they have religious protections. So it's a very cynical thing. It's a very sinister thing. What do you think about that? The mandated vaccine schedules?
Oh, I completely agree. The thing is that like I could excuse people back when like we were born. I could excuse doctors back then of like believing that vaccines were like what you should do, and you know, we really shouldn't question this because like the science is irrefutable. I can understand doctors back then believing that, because there was no other readily available information that was easily accessible. Today, in my belief, there's no excuse, because it's everywhere. Vaccine hesitancy has made headlines now. And so if you haven't even looked into that as a healthcare provider, or even as a parent, you're not doing your due diligence. And it's either out of willful ignorance and arrogance that you believe that you know better, and so therefore you already know everything, so I'm not going to look into this any further, or you are just too trusting. And after COVID, like, I don't know how to fix that for you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. the COVID shot really woke a lot of people up, and we have another thing here about that specifically. Doctors talking about the recent uptick in infant mortality. Let's pull up that clip. There we go.
For evidence. The point is that any thinking person who is being told to take a vaccine should ask for evidence, especially in pregnancy, should ask for evidence that the
it was literally what you were just saying. Like, at this stage, there's no excuse
that the vaccine is safe and effective. And all of the evidence that has come out are showing that it's not. And I personally called a funeral home that's used by UCSF. And that funeral home reported a more than 20-fold increase in the rates of perinatal deaths. So these are deaths of infants that are either born or shortly before birth that basically died. And the rate of that is very small. It's about five or six per 1,000 births where this occurs. So for this to go up by more than a factor of 20 after the vaccines rolled out, it's very disturbing. And nobody wants to talk about it. And the funeral home that told me about it said, well, don't tell anyone that we told you this, otherwise we're going to get in trouble. They're not going to use us anymore, and so forth. And so everybody is afraid that the data will leak out and the truth will be known. People don't want the truth to be known. It can cost jobs if the truth were known.
Yeah, think about how many jobs are dependent on a.
All right. So yeah, there's an undeniable increase in infant and prenatal death. Maternal mortality with the vaccine has also dramatically gone up. And this was, after, women like us, I believe you were pregnant during COVID, or is that what, did I miss that? Yeah, you definitely were.
I had my firstborn and then COVID hit. Yeah. And then it was COVID, but like right after, like all of that stuff happened, like right after I gave birth, essentially.
I mean, you were still victim to the propaganda machine of like, all these people saying if you don't get the vaccine, you don't care about your baby. Yeah. I know I had a lot of in my personal life.
I had like 3 others after that, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, and the problem is you show them evidence like this and you have one of two reactions. You either feel like a bad person or you double down. And it's sad how many people double down, right?
And I think that it's an understandable defense mechanism, right? Because you either have to face the fact that you messed up purposefully or accidentally, you messed up, and you could potentially your mistake could have potentially caused damage that you are either aware of or damage in the future that you're not yet aware of. And I know this because my firstborn, she's vaccinated with like all of her shots up to age 1. Like we stopped giving her vaccines after that. And she never got the COVID vaccine. So I understand how absolutely hard it is to question the bedrock of like everything that you grew up with. Like, yeah, of course vaccines are there to help us. Of course they make us healthier. Like what parent in their right mind would not give their child these vaccines? And I even remember I had this gut feeling about the vaccines and I didn't want to do them, but how I gaslit myself into doing it was like, well, it's my duty. Like, I'm scared about this, but I have to be better than the fear. I have to rise above it. And it's going to make her safer. It's gonna help everybody else, herd immunity. And there's all these different psychological pressures that are there very intentionally. It's a psyop to make us buy into this lie. And it's very, very hard to begin to question that, because again, it's what you've grown up with. And so it's like, well, if I have to question this, what else out there have I been believing that is false? And you have to undo years and years and years and layers of patterns of thinking. And not very many people are willing to do that work because it's very hard and it's painful.
Well, it takes a lot of time too. And but you touched on this a little earlier when we talk about like the availability of information and the availability of like a wide range of information. There's all kinds, and I'm not just talking about scrolling on your Twitter feed and seeing what mom Twitter is talking about. There's all kinds of different professional people, doctors, who will make their cases for different positions, and it's up to you as a mom, it's up to you as somebody who's going to birth a child to look into this stuff. And I mean, I'm not going to put people on blast, but it really blows my mind how many people I know that really like went into labor, pregnancy, all of the above with like very little information, and kind of just like put everything at the foot of their doctors. Like even when it came to pushing, even when it came to something as simple as like labor breathing, like these were things that they were just not prepared for. And it's you don't want to be mean, but it was one of those just like what did you expect was going to happen? Like how did you expect that it was going to be anything but horrible if you weren't prepared, even for the most basic elements of this process? And then on top of that, like breaking the disillusion that doctors, lawyers, politicians, all these people that when you're really little, you have this idea, oh, they're smart, they're the top notch, they're the upper echelons of the intelligence. You realize very quickly that when you get into situations like this, and for me, it was taking a friend who was withdrawing from heroin to the hospital and having them offer him opiates, was like you realize, oh, a lot of these people are dumb and they don't know what they're talking about. So it's up to you, especially like in pregnancy, you got to look up what's going to happen to your body. You got to understand, you got to like pay attention to the signs and symptoms that are happening within yourself, and do your own research and be an independent fact checker, which is intimidating. It definitely is. And, you want to believe that doctors have your best intentions and they know things that you couldn't possibly know. But that's just not true anymore in the day of the internet.
Well, and that's the thing is like, that's what I was going to say is like, we should be able to trust these positions of power. Mm-hmm. But again, with the way that our society is and what we know now, you can't. And the other thing is that long ago, back in the cave people days, and honestly, like much more recently as well, the females in our immediate circles would have been like preparing us for this transition and like for these major events in womanhood. And we don't have that anymore either. And to just blindly give your trust to somebody that you have known for like a handful of visits, that takes a lot of, I don't know, to me, there's two different, you have different options. Like, you can either give your trust to somebody that you don't know very well, who supposedly has all this knowledge, but we've seen that the system actually, works against us, and that's readily available information. Or you can choose to trust your own abilities to go out and seek this information and be your own advocate and trust that you know your body better than anybody else. And I think that we'd have a lot better health results if more women did that. And I don't know. I don't really fault people for wanting to go with the system. I don't fault them at all for that.
Yeah.
But I think it's been shown that you do have to do research nowadays. You do have to learn how to be your own advocate. You do have to seek out outside information, because this system is rigged.
Well, you can't always trust the motive of doctors is my big thing. Like, a lot of them are profit driven. A lot of them are feeding into the system that wants to keep you sick and unhealthy, the system that keeps poison in our food, the system that, treats pregnancy as if it's a disease rather than the most natural part of our human existence. It's just, there's so many levels to it, and the biggest part is like finding a doctor that you feel you can actually trust, finding a pediatrician you feel you can trust, finding an OBG that like you don't have to question their motives. And quite frankly, like, until I found these midwives, I had only met like one other doctor, and who I knew like actually cared. And I'll give you the quick anecdote before I leave, but I basically, like, I lived in LA, and I had like I was having horrible back pain, and it was like causing me to like break down into tears, and I have like a crazy high pain tolerance. So I didn't know what was going on, and I was staying with a family friend at the time who brought me to this incredible doctor, and literally he was with me for 5 minutes and diagnosed me with pre-pneumonia, threw me in a scan 5 minutes later and confirmed it and sent me home with a prescription. Like, that's a great doctor. That's a phenomenal doctor. That's a doctor who cares about what's going on with you, is not going to give you any, like foofy nonsense. Is not trying to scam your insurance company. In fact, actually gave me a deduction because my insurance wasn't accepted by his practice, and he was friends with, the guy who brought me, and felt bad for me. So I was, in my 20s and broke. Like, that's the kind of but that doctor is a needle in the haystack.
Yeah.
And that's a privilege to be able to find something like that. And it's not going to happen at your common hospital, unfortunately, not these days, especially with DEI. Well, we had a lot that I wanted to get into, but this is just such an expansive topic, and there is just we'll have to come back. We'll have to do this.
We'll just have to come back. Yeah.
Do this again. You're wonderful. Tell people where to follow you. Tell people like what you're doing.
Yes. So I write for Evie, and I'm gonna like pull up my handle to make sure that I don't. But I write for a publication called Evie Magazine. We're wonderful. If you liked today's talk, then you will definitely like the content that I write for Evie, as well as the other content that the other writers for Evie push out. I absolutely love them. And you can find me mainly on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram, but I haven't been active for a while. But my Twitter is at Alicia_Bittle_ or just Daughter of Wolves. And again, you can find, my full name, Alicia Bittle, on Instagram as well.
All right, guys. Like I said, it's been a long time since I've been doing streaming. We're definitely rusty. We definitely have a few kinks we got to work out. I was so excited to come back today with you, Alicia. Thank you so much. You're wonderful. Check out our D&D game. It comes out every single Tuesday around 6 p.m. Eastern time. We do episodes every single Tuesday now. This is not a drill. This is a real deal. It is finally happening. The story is great. The characters are great. It's so much fun. I'm going to be live streaming through my personal channel on Culture, and also don't at me. Please follow me on Twitter. That's where you're going to see all of my announcements for all my live streams. All of the D&D stuff is going to be posted there for now. It's going to move over to the campaign info. That's the handle, the campaign info. For now, check it out at Culture. Thank you guys for joining us today. God bless you. And if no one's told you they love you today, I do. But remember, also, don't at me. End that stream.